So I still think that philanthropy is in a very nascent stage in the country. And I only say that is because if you look at the Indian economy, and if you look at a lot of individuals, including my own father, a lot of them actually started creating their wealth only 1990 onwards. The economy opened up, and businesses opened up, and there was an opportunity. Obviously, in 1990, even the tech industry, took off, and then the late 90s and the tech boom, and that entire sector. So if you look at philanthropy today, at least in the last 10 years, the same 10 to 15 names have been doing the rounds of philanthropy, and these are significant organizations and family houses whose wealth has only grown over the last 2 decades or so. So there aren't too many other people coming into the mix, or perhaps they are, but they're not as large anymore. But I think the culture of philanthropy will truly pick up in India if people are able to enjoy the benefits that you get by doing philanthropy in the West. And I'm not just talking about the 501(c)(3) or tax benefits, but it is a lot more institutionalized. It's a lot more recognized. Even in small towns in the West, people are actively involved in philanthropy, whether it's in the upkeep and maintenance of their towns, or it's in the volunteering culture. So a lot of it starts much younger. In fact, what I find particularly interesting, and it's getting a lot more so now with schools and colleges, but at least in the West, the whole aspect of being part of community development, being part of volunteering, it's actually an ask of the curriculum. It's part of the culture. It's part of the value that you impart at a much younger age. Children grow up with that sort of exposure. So, we still are at a nascent stage because, philanthropy today is also, viewed as something that the rich do. But if you just remove the word philanthropy for a second, faith-based charity, whether it's to your temples or it's to your mosques or whatever, has been prevalent in India for centuries. So people have been doing some sort of community giving for centuries. So it isn't that philanthropy has not existed, but this term called philanthropy, all of a sudden, it's a bit of a divider, right? Then it is setting a common playing field for everybody. So it's still at its nascent stage. I think if it really has to go mainstream, then certainly should become a part of perhaps curriculum, should become a part of the culture in schools and colleges and universities, mandatory probably. It's interesting because when children from families such as mine apply to universities abroad, one of the questions in the application are, what kind of community service have you done outside school or outside your academic environment? And we're always strapped to describe what is it that we've done. But if you were to have a similar upbringing, let's say in the West, it's something which would be mandatory that you would be doing age 10, age 8, age 7 onwards. So perhaps to build that culture, and in amongst adults as well, I think existing organizations, now that the 2% CSR mandate has been put into place, yet there isn't a penalty to not follow it, but organizations that do plan to do it, I think it's very important. How do you engage all your employees to be a part of that process? And it's not just that, we've got this money set aside and we'll cut a check and, just give it. So again, having them strategically involved. It's all about creating a culture. I think the culture has gotten created with, the usual suspects, the 10 to 15 people. But it's also the onus lies on us to how quickly we can, spread that culture. Like I said, giving's been in our DNA for centuries, but I don't think people are trained in the avenues to be able to give. So it's much easier to give to your local temple. But just think about if you could have spent that money to give to, let's say, the local village school, suppose, but people aren't trained and people aren't exposed. So, what are the ways that one can create that exposure and train people to be able to do that, and so we have to have those avenues for learning, and so that would be another very important aspect if you want philanthropy to pick up, and then the third is that we're still a developing nation as opposed to the West, where a lot of nations are developed. So philanthropy has a really good ring to it, but when you talk about charitable trusts and trusts, many have a not such a good reputation as well. So to really clean up the system and make it much more transparent and accountable, so that there are barriers to entry for people who want to take advantage of the system. Yet, for those who genuinely want to give, whether it's in philanthropy or in CSR, the process is streamlined and made much more easier, and yet not mandated. I think as soon as you mandate it, it's like, telling a child not to do something, then you're sure that they're going to do it, so how do you create that fine balance? I mean, I don't think we have the answers yet, and I don't think we can emulate the West either, because when the West was going through their journey of becoming a developed nation, the world was a very different place. And when we are going through our own journey of becoming a developed nation from a developing nation, the world is a very different place. So the challenges are different, the barriers are different, and certainly our country is, very different and, beautifully chaotic. But in that chaos, there are those who find, the ability to do philanthropy. So hopefully, with times to come, the scene will change, and it's bound to change. It's not what the philanthropists can do differently, because they're doing what they really do want to do and trying to make a difference as much as they want. But I think if the environment could be created as such, which certainly is more responsive and lets them continue doing philanthropy in a much more transparent manner, that would certainly help and encourage others to be able to do it. I think the attitude right now is that the people who do philanthropy and in India are, people who are super wealthy. They're in that sphere of wealth, and so that automatically, in a lot of ways, becomes a deterrent for people to want to do philanthropy, because they have not gotten into the super segment. And so if the environment is such that it encourages you to do philanthropy, those barriers will automatically drop and fall. And for the super wealthy who are doing philanthropy, it'll become, I think, that much more transparent for them to even talk about what they do, to be able to share what they do, and not be defensive, but in a lot of ways secretive. I think a lot of philanthropists in this particular segment are much more comfortable talking about philanthropy and what they do, in outside India than they are within India, and it's probably because there's much more of an open culture and acceptance. I think philanthropy still has to go through a certain amount of acceptance in the country, and that can only be done if the barriers to do so are brought down for everyone in general.